I love witches. I can explain. The concept of the witch evolved through misunderstandings of Romani rituals, Celtic traditions, and pre-scientific medicine. And also big, strong men being really scared of women not obeying them. Now that we've entered what some have called post-masculinity, that is, masculinity has been examined through myriad frameworks and those theories are available for free to everyone internet, we've gotten dozens of spicy little takes about witches and witchcraft. For example, secret demigod Ollie Thorne posted this video about witchcraft and gender, examining the concept from a feminist perspective. And if you're interested in that video, you might be interested in this counterpoint, links below. Do some research for yourself. This is all well and good. An abundance of lenses through which to view a certain concept is healthy for a greater understanding of the world. As I heard on The Sopranos once, education enriches all aspects of life. And that's why I'm going to look at witchcraft from a perspective that's not quite as obvious. I'm going to look at it from an aesthetic perspective. Specifically, I'm going to look at the aesthetic of doing. To make an egregious understatement, witchcraft has a complex history going back to the thousands of BC. This is not going to be the focus of the essay because I am not a historian and also I know nothing, but it can serve as a good foundation for the modern aesthetics of witchcraft. First, it's important to see that witchcraft, the casting of spells, has always been seen as malicious. The Akkadians even had a witch-burning ritual. It's called Machlu, or however you pronounce that. Even when spellcasting isn't gendered like it is in our current society, witchcraft is still associated with ill tidings. If magic is not associated with ill tidings, it's called religion. As the various cultures of Europe settled around Christianity and vague notions of hierarchy, the witch slowly became associated with the outcast, the rejected. As I mentioned before, a lot of the aesthetic of the witch, gesturing towards herbalism, flowing garments, bare feet. Double toil and trouble. Those are generally taken from people groups that were othered by the dominant cultures of the West. As stated earlier, Romani and native Celts suffered a lot from this stereotyping. However, simply othering a people group isn't enough to spark mass panic that you get with anti-witchcraft movements, which, by the way, occurred like a lot in European history. Now, instead, a new dimension was added to the game of marginalization. Power of an unclear source. See, the clergy had been using rituals for just about forever. Baptism, Latin recitations of prayers,
penile shaving surgery.
But these things were okay because God said so. At least, according to the clergy. And there's the rub. The clergy, of course, considered their rituals sacred, and any other rituals profane. We can't precisely determine intent, but the mechanics of accusing someone of witchcraft are very clear. First, that individual, who is almost always a part of some marginalized group, women, foreigners, the poor, non-white people, that individual was implied to have committed a profane act, something deeply unsettling to a black and white view of morality. Generally, this was framed as the accuser having made a deal with the devil or some other sort of D&D monster. This implication alone is usually enough for an insular or deeply religious community to expel the accused. But on top of that, the individual was accused of having power beyond their means. Here we see the dichotomy of the fascist's villain bubbled to the top of the cauldron like so much eye of newt. The enemy is weak in that they are morally corrupt, and the enemy is strong so that they can constitute enough of a threat that we need to act immediately. To historical witch hunters, especially considering they lived in a time before fascism was a thing that you could look out for, this appeared to be a real threat. Witches were always reviled, but they gradually picked up symbols of women, quote-unquote, abusing the quote-unquote natural order of sexuality.
Phallic symbol, phallic symbol.
And they picked up magical accoutrements like the pointed hat, which throughout history has been headgear of both magicians and of the outcast. Slowly, the idea of power consolidated in an antisocial, deeply malicious figure, that became our understanding of the witch. We see the importance of power overtaking the importance of profanity in The Coven in Macbeth, for example. Here are three women who represent danger and evil, but more importantly, abilities that dwarf the main characters. And, even more compelling, abilities that cannot be explained. Popular culture grew and evolved. The Wizard of Oz did the green skin. True ugliness that was supposed to represent the corrupt nature of the soul was reduced to a few warts and less teeth, and the pointy hat became the archetype's signature. The danger fell away, piece by piece. The fear of the unknown that originally characterized the arcane, and in fact originally defined the word arcane, was melded with popular fantasy and became flaccid and common. Spells were represented in fantasy art as flashy bursts of color and light. Even 1977's Suspiria, which did add some menace to the witch, didn't quite capture the true terror that lies just beneath the sexist surface of historical witchcraft. That was The Witch, or The Vivitch, I think. It is a 2015 horror film that is possibly my favorite horror film of all time. I'm using this film as a template because it perfectly encapsulates what I'm trying to say about the aesthetics of doing. Let me actually define that real quick because it sounds sort of suggestive. The aesthetics of doing refers to the stimulating visual and psychological sensations caused by witnessing another individual perform an action. I'd say this translates to a lot of things that people enjoy sportively. They consider watching simple actions to be pleasant, and we can see this in silent DIY videos, some chemistry videos, metallurgy videos, and other displays of that nature. But the aesthetics of doing when it comes to witchcraft, at least our modern understanding of witchcraft, are a little different. They're not sportive. Instead, we find this doing intriguing rather than pleasant, and we even find it horrifying at times. Like, remember the baby touching? That was weird, right? That was unsettling, and then the next couple cuts retroactively made it horrifying. The implication is clear. This unnamed witch just killed a baby and turned it into mash, and then did something with the mash. But the video didn't cut to a knife in the baby, and the music didn't, like, jump scare you. No, we didn't get to see the big stabberoni. Instead, we focused on the witch performing an activity that we did not understand. Consider leaving your office building in the small hours of the morning, and the elevator door opens to show a man in a business suit carrying a briefcase, facing the back wall. He does not move as you enter the elevator. Consider driving through the woods as the sun is setting and passing by a very old man squatted over something you can't quite make out, tearing at it with his bare hands. Consider a fire in a stable. The flames spread too fast and the horses couldn't be saved. Everyone else evacuated the area to avoid hearing the horrible sounds of the doomed animals within, except the farmer's young son, who stayed to watch, alone. I want to introduce here the term ghoulish. I've asked a lot of people what they think ghoulishness means, but I've never gotten a satisfactory answer from any of them. I'd assert that the word ghoulish describes an action that precludes social norms in a way that evokes imprecise malice. In other words, a ghoulish action is an action that is disturbing because a quote-unquote normal person wouldn't do it, and because even if the action doesn't cause harm, it suggests that the actor might not mind causing harm. A ghoulish action is one that is invasive to the public concept of space and paints the actor as a possible repeat offender. In that gap between seeing the outcome and not seeing the intent, we are caught between curiosity and revulsion. This gap is, in a way, the uncanny valley, the space between wonder and horror, something so close that you could touch it if only you were fully aware of the consequences of doing so. This gap is what makes something creepy, and it is fundamental to every effective horror movie of all time. Can it lead to some unsavory implications? Of course. They're called witch trials, but if care is taken to focus on the aesthetic rather than imply the necessity of reactionary violence, truly disturbing and intriguing behavior can set the mood for a horror movie way better than Jason ever could. Feel the cauldron-stirring mantra of Macbeth's witches. Double, double toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. By the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes. In a reflexive desire to contextualize the doings of witches, he asks, "What is it you do?" To which the three reply, in tandem, as though possessed, "A deed without a name." For the sake of people listening who earnestly couldn't put together the nonsense spewing from my donut hole, I've compiled a list of points this essay has made. 1. Witches in history were assumed to have power that society did not afford them. 2. Witches in media express this extra societal power through obscure intent. 3. Witches in horror create fear from an unknown source of power, and through taking actions that imply an unknown source of power. 4. That's rad. It would certainly be interesting to hear some investigation of this that focused on gender, class, culture, even fashion, but I wanted to see it in a vacuum and see what sensations the art of action causes in the consumer. I hope that, perhaps, you'll take witches a little more seriously this Halloween, and remember, in the back of your mind, witches are the ancestors of everything we love that scares us. In the spirit of the fireside story, I would like to conclude on a mysterious English folk tale, and one that is, by all accounts, true. In 1943, 4 boys from Worcestershire were collecting eggs in the nearby Hagley Woods, when one of them noticed, out of the corner of his eye, something strange. A human skull, bleached white by the sun, and a scattered skeleton beneath it, were cradled in the tangled trunk of a wych elm. Investigation began soon after, but the remains were too desiccated, and the science too rudimentary, to determine the victim's identity. But one curious detail was discovered. The remains of the victim's hand were found a distance from the tree itself. 1 year later, deep in the nearby city of Birmingham, a single sentence of graffiti was discovered on a blank brick wall. It read, Who put Bella down the witch elm? The question remains unanswered. And happy Halloween.